everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin. Hello, Rod. And we have been away for a little bit, I think over a month. I think it's 5 weeks. And a few things.
It's been much longer, Kale. Lots has been going on, man.
A few things have happened on the world front, the political front, the personal front. So Rod, tell me, brother, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, I'm here in my new location near the LSU College campus where I live with my son. I've got my Tito's vodka. I've got my Chick Tract. I've got my my icon from the Holy Land close to hand, because, as readers of my blog know, I am in the middle of a divorce.
Yes,
I can't talk about it on the lawyer has said. It's really funny. My lawyer's a cynical Catholic from New Orleans, and the last thing he said to me as we were going out, he said, "You're a Catholic, right?" I told him twice I'm not a Catholic. He didn't.
It's probably not registering with him. It's like whatever. Christianish stuff.
Yeah. You're a Christian, you must be a Catholic. He said, "You ever heard of Saint Fu?" I'm like, "No, who's that? Is that some Chinese saint?" Yeah. "No, I'll tell you who Saint Fu is." And he writes down STFU. He said, "You're going to have to start praying to Saint Fu, brother." So I shall.
This is going to be hard for you though, Rod, because you're a talker. I mean, you're a talker. You process out loud. You write. So this is going to be a little bit of a problem. I don't mean to be flip about it, but honestly.
No. I do mean to be flip about it, because as I've said on the blog, and I said this with my wife's consent, she filed for divorce. I think she did the right thing. It's been a really hard last 9 years, and we're doing this amicably. Unfortunately, I get custody of Matthew, who's 22, and okay, he didn't hear me. He's wearing his headphones.
Smart man.
But no. It sucks. It sucks really bad. It sucks, especially to be the conservative Christian dude who gets a divorce. But here we are, and I have to say, I saw Julie, my wife, last Sunday for the first time since I left for Hungary in February, and she looks at peace, which I'm glad about, and I feel at peace too. And so we're going to push through this, and we're going to be decent to each other and love on our kids. And
of course,
anyway, Julie and I both agreed that people have been so kind to us.
That's good to hear. Yeah,
it really is, because I've heard from so many people who said either I've gone through this or I came close to it and I'm praying for you and all that. So people really are good. I'm still the right-wing Christian guy who believes divorce is a terrible thing, and that's why we fought to save this marriage for 9 years. But anyway, here we are, and God is good. God is in His heavens, and I got to tell you, since the day after my wife sent me the email saying she'd filed for divorce, I flew off to Jerusalem. I was scheduled to go to Jerusalem for Orthodox Holy Week, and I got to tell you, if something this bad is going to happen to you, the place you want to be is in Jerusalem if you're a Christian on Holy Week. I mean, it was really life-changing for me. I saw amazing things, met amazing people. God did me so many good turns there. And one of the things I want to tell you real quick before we get into talking about serious stuff, and it's been about 2 or 3 weeks since Holy Week. And this was one of the smallest things that happened to me, but it is one of the things that has stayed with me. On Good Friday, I came out of my hotel room. I was staying in the old city at a place called the Gloria Hotel. Came out of the hotel room, and there's the chambermaid in the hallway getting ready to make room. So about a middle-aged Palestinian woman. And I just smiled at her. She smiled back, and she was wearing this little cross around her neck. This is something very simple, like a knitted thing. I said, "Oh, your cross is really pretty." She looked at me with these intense eyes, and she took it off and said, "It's yours." She put it on my head, and here it is right here, this little cross. I burst into tears, and she was like, "Whoa, what?" I said, "I'm so sorry. You have no idea how much."
There are some things.
I said, "I've seen things. things." No, but I told her, I said, you have no idea the kind of week I've had, and I needed that act of mercy. She just hugged me, and I said, "What's your name?" She said, "Angela." I said, "People tell me I'm like their angel." She said, she used her hand. She said, "They tell me their stories. I keep them in my heart."
Wow.
And I'm just like,
Yeah. I need this. Yeah.
No, but I did need that. And
Yeah.
the thing that has stayed with me, I did amazing things that week. I saw incredible things. I was at the Holy Fire ceremony. I was at Easter at the tomb where Christ arose from the dead. And yet the thing that stays out in my mind more than anything else is that simple act of mercy from the chambermaid. So that has been so catechetical for me, because that cliche about how be kind because everybody you know is fighting a great battle.
Yeah.
Man, is it true?
Yeah.
It's so true. And she was so good to me at a time when I needed it more than I needed anything else.
Yeah. My goodness.
And she didn't hand me a chick tract.
See, and that maybe that's a difference. I mean, maybe that's a difference between genuine mercy and the severe mercies of a Jack Chick tract. Maybe our audience isn't fully aware of what a Jack Chick tract is. Rod, could you regale us here just real quick? I mean, this is not.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, Jack Chick, who died a few years ago, he was this fundamentalist Protestant who was famous for doing these little tracts.
So open it up. Show the comic part of the tract.
Yeah, the comic part. Oh, yeah, his comic. Look, this is about the revolution. The revolution is underway, and
love it.
He's got a very distinct comic style, drawing style.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I found them when I was a kid. You can find them sometimes. People will leave them in bathrooms or public places. And I just got kind of obsessed with him because Jack, man, he does not mess around.
No, he's hardcore. I mean, I remember stumbling across them, around. I sort of wonder if this is a regional thing. I mean, you and I are both from Louisiana, and as Catholic as Catholic as Southern Louisiana is, there's still a heavy fundamentalist Protestant, population there, and so it wasn't unusual to run into these things. But I sort of wonder. I bet somebody up here in New England or maybe even in California has probably never even seen a Jack Chick tract.
Jack lived in California, by the way.
Yeah,
he really did.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're really, really hardcore, and there's just something weird and satisfying about them. I can't put my finger on it, but Matthew, my son, was handed that the other day at Free Speech Alley at LSU. That's an institution in our alma mater. Every Wednesday, people stand out there. You can say what you want. Anyway, a fundamentalist gave him that, and he, knowing that Matt and I both have soft spots for eccentrics, and so he knew I would love that.
That's good. That's great stuff. And
So, man, a lot is going on since
so a little bit. So you've been in Hungary primarily. That was sort of your base of operations when you've been gone for this chunk of time, and so there was a lot of talk leading up to a certain election, and you and I have not spoken since.
We haven't.
That election's happened. So tell us what happened. I mean, my gosh.
Viktor Orban, Prime Minister Viktor Orban, won a fourth term by an even greater majority than they expected. I was there at the Fidesz, that's his party, at the Victory Party, and they when I walked in, I was talking to some people in the party I know, and they said, "Yeah, the exit polls are looking really good," but he won a 2/3 majority in the parliament, which is huge.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it was satisfying for me was I'd been reading. I can't read Hungarian. I've been reading the Western media coverage, and it was all about just how glorious the opposition was. They're going to defeat this ogre Orban.
Yeah.
And they had brought in a lot of international election observers to make sure it was fair, and it was. But what the media, our media, never figured out was the opposition was just pathetic. They were really pathetic. And the Peter Markizoy, who was the United Opposition's leader, he kept making all these gaffes. He's a mayor of a small city, and he said at one point, "We're the most diverse coalition. We've got communists on one side and fascists on the other," which he actually did. But you don't say that.
Like actual fascists, not the ones that are cooked up in Western media.
That's right. And he told a racist Stevie Wonder Ray Charles joke.
Oh, good. It's funny. It's funny. I didn't read anything about that in all the coverage that I was reading.
Imagine that
in the legacy press. Not a word about that. It was more about the sort of the ogre of Orban, right? I mean, that's sort of the image that they have really been dogged about.
My gosh, yeah. And here's I think the most important thing. the Western media seemed to think that the fact that Orban was not 100% down with war on Russia was going to doom him, because it would have in a lot of Western Europe. And I mean, Orban, they're members of the EU, and Orban did not stand in the way of first round of sanctions and things like that. But he would not let NATO send weapons through Hungary to Ukraine. And boy, that pissed off the Europeans and the media. Orban became the anti-war candidate, and he was exactly where the Hungarian people are. They all support Ukraine. None of them like Russia. Of course. They also want to keep Hungary out of the war. And so that was part of Orban's victory too. But it just goes to show you again how the Western media simply, by trying to impose their own framework on this country, just didn't get it. I remember sitting at a dinner in the Netherlands on my last night, next to last night there, I was traveling. And this Dutch political scientist said, this is the problem with foreign correspondents. They're supposed to be there to tell their readers back home what's going on in the foreign country. But what they're really there to do, the way they behave, is to reflect their readers and their listeners and viewers' prejudices back to them.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I have two thoughts on this. One is about just sort of the role that where Hungary physically is on the map, which I think is really important. And it's not just Hungary, but it's places like Romania and a lot of these border countries, basically between the West and the East. I was listening to an Alex Kucheta podcast a couple of weeks ago, the Subversive podcast. Everyone should listen to it. It's fantastic.
She's great.
We're gonna have Alex on here in a couple of weeks, we hope. But she says, look, the history of my country. She's Romanian, I believe, lives in Transylvania, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, near the Hungarian border.
Near the Hungarian border. She's like, look, the history of my country is trying not to get swallowed by Russia. I mean, it's like we're always going to be in this position, and so there's a delicate balance between standing up to the bully, but also not offering yourself up for easy pickings, and so it's just a dynamic that you just don't hear about. We should do the no-fly zone and all these sort of things. And do I want Russia's aggression to be checked, to stop? Yeah, of course. But what does that mean? I know there's a refusal to really wrestle with what that actually means.
Yeah, I was talking with one of the readers on my blog today who, works in Washington for the government, and he was commenting on something I said on my blog about how, as you and I are talking today, filming this, things might have changed by the time this goes up, but Viktor Orban has angered the European Union because he is using Hungary's vote in the European Union to block total sanctions or total cutoff of Russian oil and natural gas. Yeah. And his argument is, he said this publicly, he said, look, we go along with this to a point, but we would destroy our economy because they get like 80% of their natural gas from Russia and 60% of their oil. They're a landlocked country. They can't have a tanker come up and bring them stuff.
Right.
And he's right about that. But my friend who's he's a bureaucrat. He said, the blob here would easily expect Hungary to destroy itself and expect Europe to destroy its economy for the sake of American foreign policy goals. I mean, it's crazy.
But it is so telling to me that as the way the whole thing shook out in terms of the election, that Orban positioning himself in such a way for the protection of his own country and the interests of his own country makes him the anti-war candidate, and then really runs away with this victory.
Yeah.
Because I remember you talking, offline, and you mentioned this on the blog and elsewhere, I'm sure, that the people in Orban's party were really quite concerned going into this election. I mean, look, it's the fourth go around. All parties end. All that kind of stuff. And so it's interesting to me that what got pitched initially as, this could be problems for what actually became his foundation of support.
Yeah. When I left there last summer, they were all worried, but for just the reasons you say. And then, because it made sense. And so when I hear or read some people in the American commentariat saying, well, he's an authoritarian, authoritarians don't lose elections. I'm here to tell you they were scared to death.
Yeah.
But they were feeling a lot better when I got back there in February because Marky Zoe was turning out to be such a pathetic candidate. And then, of course, the war started and Orban got it just the right spot there because Marky Zoe, the opposition, they were doing whatever Brussels said. And the Hungarian people were scared. Yeah, and I heard the same thing, by the way, Kale, that Alex told you when I went to Romania. I went there to visit some monasteries and I was in Bucharest giving some talks. Same thing for the Romanian people. They hate Russia. Yeah. They don't want Russia messing with them. But at the same time, they felt like NATO was being reckless. And the Romanians I talked to felt like their own government wouldn't listen to them. That's unlike in Hungary.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, but I wanted to pivot to this other thing because I don't want to, I know people in the audience probably a little bit done with electoral politics in an Eastern European country right now. But to me, the other takeaway and the thing that just doesn't seem to go away is the insistence on so many of the pundit class, and I say that from the left and from the right because I try to stay up with everybody. Their refusal to change their take on Orban. And now, like for me, like I don't know anything. I read as widely as I can, but there just seems to be an absolute investment in this image of this hard right, what alt right or this sort of super right or thuggish right or whatever it is they try to tar it with. And to me, it sounds more an expression of a pundit's concerns or fears rather than sort of anything based in what we might call the real.
Yeah, I had a background interview with a journalist for a major Washington-based liberal news outlet, and it was good. She said, "Look, I'm liberal, but I'm going over there for CPAC. CPAC is going to have a Hungary event. And I just want to kind of get some background." And so, all right, fine. And I was telling her that, giving her some deep background, and telling her that one of the big problems the Hungarians or conservative Hungarians are going to face is the fact that the younger generation are being socialized by TikTok and all this. And she said to me, I swear to God, she said, "Wait a minute, it's if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you're saying that they're free to listen to what they want to listen to." I'm like, yeah, it's a European country. But she genuinely had believed all the garbage that our media say about Hungary. And I told her, I said, you'll go there. It's going to blow your mind. I told her I had a British friend there, an expat British friend who tells me that he still has friends. He's been there 7 years and still has friends back in the UK who ask him about, if he has to dodge jackbooted thugs off the street.
Okay, Rod. So you first left Louisiana in around 1990. Is that when you first left?
When I left to move away from here?
Yeah, the first time.
1992. I moved
1992. Okay, yeah. So I first left Louisiana to go to school in 1993. So I went up to New England for school, for college, after my freshman year at LSU. And I don't know if you had this experience, but I would tell folks that I was from Louisiana. And I would have to, for a lot of people, I would have to kind of basically say, no, I don't live on the bayou. I live in a neighborhood, and they had this sort of a lot of people, not everybody, of course, but enough that I remember. A lot of people sort of had this image of me that they had gleaned from some movie or three about bayous and boats and alligators and that kind of thing. And I wonder, sorry, I'm not really getting to my point here. In other words, people have this sort of cartoon image of a place that they've never been. Yeah. And I wonder how much of our betters, our media elites, et cetera, how much of this is just generated from strange images that they have inherited unconsciously about what an Eastern European country really kind of looks like.
You will find no one as parochial as a Washingtonian, a Bostonian, or a New Yorker, a liberal person. They don't know what they don't know, but they do know that they're smarter than everybody else. Right. And right. I mean, I used to live in DC and New York. I loved both places, but oh man, to try to pierce the the ignorance there and the moralistic ignorance.
Yeah, well, that's an important point. What do you mean by that, Rod? The moralistic ignorance? Because boy, I felt that. I mean, I remember in 1992 when I went up there the first time, and I felt that.
I'll give you an example just from this week. NPR this week, as you and I are talking, did a big. You're smiling when I say NPR.
Yeah.
It's the gold standard for moralistic liberal ignorance. They did a big 10-minute takeout on Rokor, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, which is the exile church, the church that went after the Bolshevik Revolution, but they've been reunited with Moscow. It's all kinds of Orthodox politics.
Yep.
But they argue that American Orthodoxy is drawing all these far-right white supremacist converts. And it was, to read this, it just blew my mind. It's like, this is pure propaganda. It is true. Honestly, it is true that some right-wing radical white supremacists are being drawn to Orthodoxy. And I've heard this from people, and I've never seen it in my church, but I've heard this before. But the number of people who qualify is minuscule. I mean, minuscule. But NPR used this, and they only interviewed people who are associated with the far left of American Orthodoxy.
Right. And notice, and I always notice this, and I tweeted something about this a few days ago. It's like, hey, my media friends, is it possible for you to construct a sentence in which you use the phrase right wing and you don't use the word far right? I think you can do it. I'm pretty sure you can type right without putting far right next to, the far part. So, but when, I don't think they'd understand that. Like, I really don't think they understand. And it's just because it's just natural. Oh, it's the far right. Well, I'm just begging, what is the far right? Like, I really want to know from their perspective, what is the far right?
Yeah, I mean, anybody to the right of David French. But it was striking to me because, of course, one of the things they honed in on is the Orthodox Church is critical of the LGBT.
Right.
It's like, you idiots.
Always.
Almost every church other than the Unitarians are critical of LGBT till 30 years ago. Right. Come on. But they're so parochial. They have no idea what they're talking about. I got to tell you, Kale, this is a thing that before I used to roll my eyes at it. Yeah. And now I see it as something deeply sinister. I see them as trying to build up hatred and a justification for a future persecution. I really do mean that.
So kind of like a boogeymanification or something like that. You're creating boogeymen.
Well, let me put it to you like this, and I'm careful with. I want to be careful about this comparison because I don't think it's as severe as this. But I'm talking about the same kind of logic. I remember going in the year 2000. I was in Jerusalem covering Pope John Paul's trip there for the New York Post. And I had a day or two before the Pope got to town. So I went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, and they had a big exhibit on about how the German people were prepared to accept the Holocaust.
You mean like literally like prepared, like as in like to prepare
something? Propaganda, like happened like 30 years before Hitler even came to power.
Like priming the pump type thing.
Priming the pump, And it started with this mania for hygiene, importance of hygiene. We've got a big social hygiene, and eugenics was a huge thing there, as it was here. In America.
And here, it was big here.
This history's been scrubbed there, but it was a huge thing here.
And exclusively in progressivist circles, by the way.
All the progressives were in favor of eugenics. Yeah. And then, it just started gradually moving on and on. And Jews in the 1920s in the German press came to be described as being parasites and as threats to the safety of the German people, to the health of the German people. And of course, where it went from that.
Of course,
Now, I don't want to be understood as saying that, therefore, they're preparing Auschwitz for Christians. I don't think that's true, and I don't want to be offensive by saying that. Right. However, I am saying that I think they're laying the groundwork for marginalization and exclusion. And because if you only get your news from NPR, you're going to listen to that and think, oh my God, these Russian Orthodox Christians or these Greek, and Russia was a big part of it too, even though 70% of the Orthodox Christians in America, we're a very small number, only about 1 million of us, 70% of us are Greek, right? We're Greek, not Russian. The rogue core has only about 24,000 members.
And that's tiny. I mean,
there are mega churches in Dallas with more members.
Literally, I mean, like Tiger Stadium on a Saturday night has, three times as much as that.
4 times
in the stadium.
Now they built it
up. That's right.
Yeah.
But it's been a while since I've been home, folks. But 4 times. I mean, that's crazy.
I've had people in the last year. I've had people in the intelligence community mention to me that said to encourage me with live not by lies and things like that. To say keep writing because everything you say is absolutely true and even more true than you realize. And they can't say more than that. But one of my readers, ex-CIA, wrote to me and said, yeah, that was one thing that he's a conservative. He said, that was one of the most shocking things about joining the agency. It's just how left-wing and secular and anti-Christian they are. That shocked me. I would just kind of naturally assume that if you're in the agency, you must be some sort of conservative. Nope, not true.
That is really interesting. I certainly wouldn't have thought that either. I mean, my own sort of overly simplistic heuristic suggested that they would be sort of military adjacent type.
Yeah, exactly. But look at our military.
Yeah, look at our military. As soon as I said it out loud, I was like, I just set Rod up for that one because that's one of the things that you and I have been concerned about in the sort of this period of woke that we're living through. But I'm reminded of this notion, Herbert Marcuse, talks about repressive tolerance, and repressive tolerance doesn't mean tolerance at all. It means quite the opposite. It means to repress anybody to the left of you. To the right. To the right of you.
Yeah. But for the sake of virtue, and that's what we're dealing with now.
It really is. And I don't know how to convey that to people. I think people are going to hear us talk about this and, kind of do the eye roll like, well, Rod and Kale, the sky's falling and
Christians have to be victims.
Right. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, I mean, you really need to see the pattern and the pattern, of course, the pattern is never the same. It's not a duplicate. It's not a clone, but the pattern certainly suggests that we're walking into another vortex of sorts in which, what is to be gained by turning everything into an enemy, everything into a vermin, everything else, I should say, into a parasite. Yeah. Well, what do you do with parasite? You spray them. You eliminate.
Exactly. This is what the exhibit at Yad Vashem was trying to point out, that this is preparing people for this. But what's so interesting to me is that the pre-Nazis, the 1920s Germans, focused on health and safety. This is what we're dealing with now. We've got to be safe. We can't tolerate this free speech because people will be unsafe.
Right.
I got to say, though, too, just today, there's a big story in the Washington Post about how the Republicans are ready to pounce on culture war issues. And I mean, it's so classic because this is how the left is. They the cultural left anyway, that they see that any resistance to what they want culturally is fighting the culture war.
Right. Of
well,
course.
And they were talking about transgender in schools, CRT, and all the usual stuff, and they just can't seem to grasp that ordinary people hate this stuff.
Yeah.
And the story did make a really interesting thing. It said that Hispanic voters in America that's the battleground right now.
Yeah.
And that a lot of them are natural Democrats, but they're socially conservative, and they don't want their kids being taught, they're first graders, that there are 10 genders and all that stuff.
Right.
But the fact that, but then again, this is the blindness of our media elite. This is their normality. And so they see anything deviating from their normality, it must be far right. Well, I think they're going to learn in November that this is a problem.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe this is a little bit inside baseball stuff, but look, you've been bouncing around, the conservative and right pundit class for a really long time, and you got a lot of friends there, and a lot of folks. I mean, I'm as an outsider, I remain surprised how the scramble of the post 2015 ascendancy of Trump has not settled down.
No, no.
And the reason why I'm bringing this up is I don't know if you know, we have a new, I think it's an information czar or misinformation czar. I think her name is Nina Yankovic. No,
Yankovic or something. Yeah, she's like a loony. I saw some of the stuff.
So she's clearly a drama kid. Spent a lot of time in high school musicals. It would appear. If you do a little search on Google, you can see all kinds of catchy little jingles that she sings. But she's a Democrat partisan, which you would expect, right? But I just can't believe, Rod, that somebody like that shows up on the scene, right? Created by the Biden administration, and all of these people that I guarantee you a decade ago would be howling at the absurdity and the on the noseness of all of this sort of movement, and so much of the sort of the sober and smart conservatives, the not those crazy Looney Tunes, who have fallen for the MAGA crap, and all this, that they're not, they might smirk a little bit at Nina and her friends, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of real pushback that I've seen. I mean, I don't know what have you seen about this stuff?
Look, I mean, you're right. It's insane that this is even tolerated, but there's a connection between that and the fact that late night television and Saturday Night Live have become unwatchable in the Trump era.
Oh God! Yeah. Well, it remains unwatchable. You see the Roe v. Wade medieval skit opener the other night.
Just so dumb. It's like I'm capable of laughing at my own side, but it's just they have no sense of humor anymore. No. And but yeah, I think that the fact that the Republicans too, the Washington Republicans still haven't gotten it, but somebody like Ron DeSantis has. I was so heartened by the fact that when he passed, and the Florida legislature passed that law, that very mild law to keep teachers from propagandizing children age 9 and under with gender ideology. The media went berserk, the "Don't Say Gay" law, even though that had nothing to do with it. Well,
and of course, if I could just interrupt, and of course, this is a classic move that you've been calling out for years, which is there's no such thing as this thing.
Right.
And then the next move is like, well, yeah, it might be a thing, but it's no big deal. And then the next one is like, actually, it's good that we do this. And then the last one is that, it's always been so. And you're like, wait, it goes just, it's like 4 panels and it happens every time. No such thing. Why are you so crazy? What's wrong with you, Roger? What are your hangups?
Why are you fighting the culture war here?
And then it's like it's the same damn script every time.
Yep. Anyway, so DeSantis passes this, and it turns out, according to a poll, that this is hugely popular. Even nationally, 53% of Joe Biden voters support this. 53% of Biden voters. Okay, and then Walt Disney. Gets a lot of internal pressure from its woke employees, and it comes out against it. Well, the thing that Republican governors usually do, Mike Pence, circa 2015.
Buckle right away.
It's like, run weeping into the corner and give big business what they want.
Don't take our money. Don't take our taxes. We'll give you a tax credit.
Yeah, but Ron DeSantis says, no, and he punishes them. I'm like, Lord Jesus, where did this man come from? Let's elect him quickly.
Yeah.
But so he's not going to suffer from this. He's going to win points from this. Yeah. J.D. Vance wins in Ohio, and I guarantee you, as a personal friend of J.D. Vance, if he gets elected, he is going to be a greater foe of big business than the Democrat he's running against.
Yeah. Well, irony of ironies, of course, which is and I think that this gets at what do people really care about? It's like, and maybe all along, all of, people like you and people, Attack and certainly Buchanan, who inspired a lot of this stuff beforehand, has been trying, to call out the so-called Washington conservatives, but really what they cared about was business and the military, right? I mean, that really does seem to be what it has been about. And they've basically, used social conservatives and the kind of just not even like the ideologically socially conservative, but just the sort of the natural default conservatism of family people. And they basically kind of used them, us, I guess I dare say, for years. And boy, I got to tell you, JD Vance, winning the primary the other night, boys, he has just awakened the demons. They hate him.
Oh yeah, traitor to class. We gave you a Yale education, and what have you done with it?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and it's and I'll tell you, some people have said to me, well, he's such a hypocrite. And I said, I'll tell you what, this guy, and I'm telling you this from private conversations that happened months ago between us. I'm just not going to say what he said privately, but let me just assure you, this guy knows exactly what big business is up to. And they have pissed him off because he knows how much they hate people like his family. Yeah. They really do. And JD is one of the few American politicians who understands that culture war is class war. Yeah. Do you think all these poor and working class people, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, really want their kids to sit in a public school? They can't afford to put their kids in like some private Christian school and have their kids taught this gender ideology crap. No, they don't. JD is, and God willing, there'll be more like him. They get this. They get the culture war is a class war. But JD also gets that big business has been way too privileged in this country. And maybe it took business becoming woke to make conservative people understand that. But I'm glad we're waking up to it. And this is another Viktor Orban lesson for people to understand.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, Kale. I was this dinner I was at in the Netherlands before I came back. I was speaking to a conservative. It's a private conservative dinner. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, a bunch of us were just standing around. And I heard this one guy, he's a politician in the Netherlands. He said, if I hadn't just gotten reelected, I'd go to Budapest because that's where everything's happening now. Mm-hmm. I heard a few days later, I was talking with a prominent British conservative journalist. And he said, yeah, everybody knows that Central Europe and Budapest in particular is where everything is happening now. That's really true.
Yeah.
And the last people who are going to figure this out are the David Frenches of the world and the Washington people and Conservatism Inc. But it's happening over there because Viktor Orban understands something and he's not afraid.
Well, if you recall, half year ago, we had on the podcast Michael Brendan Doherty, a friend of ours, and I think he writes for National Review, and he's great. And we were talking about this then, and he was talking about just the idea of statecraft, that conservatives, and he's talking about conservatives here in this country, have got to abandon. And maybe I'm putting words into his mouth, but forgive me, Michael. I'm doing this spirit right here, I hope. But we have to abandon these kind of libertarian knee-jerk default mode that we've been operating under for a really long time.
Yeah.
And we have to start getting into the habit of thinking about statecraft as the proper manipulation of power. And I got to tell you, I'm trying to sort all this stuff out myself, but the default is no longer operable, and what is what is the line? Something, Rod, like those who say they just want to be left alone are always going to lose to people who want to win.
I haven't heard that, but that's
version
something
of that.
To that.
There really is. And look, this makes me uncomfortable. Like I get scared of this, but
that's me though. I just want to be left alone. I'm going to be left alone to go to church, to educate my children like I want, but that's not the world we live in. And this is one of the things that, I like David French personally. I respect him, but this is the thing that people like him just do not get, that the other side does not want to just leave us alone. They want to wipe us out. And the only people at this point, the only institutions in American life that conservatives have any say in is the state. And this is why the whole Reagan small government, that is so out of date. If that's what you believe, you're going to get rolled over by woke capitalism and everybody else.
Well, yeah, no, I've always admired your you, you don't throw these kind of bombs at people. You don't really make it personally here, especially about David French. And every Sunday morning when I subscribe to his little Substack, and
I do too.
It'll come in, and I'm like, okay, like I feel I'm just trying to be responsible. Like I said, I try to read as widely as I can, but invariably, I'm like, dude, you are fighting a war from like circa 1987, and it's like. And of course, this recent spat, of course, Roe versus Wade, with the leak through Politico, and
we have to talk about that. We haven't talked about that. That's happened since. That's the big news.
Yeah, and so we'll segue right into it, because it hits on this French issue and other things, of course, and people's sort of default settings, as that you have to be able to take a look at yourself, like, and be critical about your own sort of priors, your own default settings. And, so the whole Roe v. Wade thing comes out, and it's really interesting to watch, sort of the fallout of all these sort of things. I mean, we can get into the leak, and of course the leak is totally egregious. To David French's credit and his ilk, to their credit, they were similarly aghast at the breakdown of norms, of which I'm sure both of us agree. But it seems to be a much bigger deal than just talking about democratic norms.
Yeah. I mean, this is really the leak of Justice Alito's draft opinion was just absolutely extraordinary. And I mean, it as much as it made me, as a pro-life person, feel happy that it looks like we might get Roe overturned, and that's not a done deal. It's not set in stone. The fact that somebody within the court, probably somebody on the left, but not strictly necessarily, released it's just another sign of the breakdown of our system, according to ideology.
So tell me this again, as I know you're not like a court watcher type person. It's not necessarily your beat, but from what I understand it, there are the 9 justices, and each justice kind of operates like an independent law firm, right? And so they each have 4 lawyers or clerks, right? So there are 36. So there are 36 clerks, and there are 9 justices, and the leak has to have come from one of those 36 or one of those 9. I'm so surprised, Rod, that we don't know who it is by now.
Well, they don't have any way to investigate this. I mean, they have the marshal of the court has been tasked by Chief Justice with investigating it, but I read that she doesn't have any real. They're not Scotland Yard there.
In other words, they don't have subpoena powers. What you're saying,
right? Well, and they don't even know how to do that. That's not their job, because this has never happened before.
It's literally never happened. Yeah,
and what law was broken? There's no law that says you can't do that, because nobody ever thought to make a law that you shouldn't do that. I remember I've been into the court once. I had a friend who was a clerk for one of the justices, and we're walking through the offices, and I happened to notice an opinion. It was a completed opinion that had not been published. It was sitting out on a desk, and I mentioned to my friend, I'm like, hey, I think I'm not supposed to see that. My friend said, oh, no, you're not. And I honestly, I didn't even, I made a point just out of respect for my friend of not paying attention to it. But that's how seriously they take it. My friend was really freaked out. It was just sitting there on the desk. And, but my friend, as a clerk, was extremely, extremely careful about it. But I think we've really seen some things come out. I mean, just since we've seen, I don't know how often this happened, we've seen some pro-choice radicals call for the burning of the Eucharist in churches, invading churches, things like that. I mean, this
interesting that they go right to the churches and all this, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And somebody said that, this is all Catholic justices doing that. I wish the Catholic Church could claim the privilege of having all Catholic judges, but Neil Gorsuch, who was on the Alito thing, is an Episcopalian.
Right.
But anyway, it's this again is Spanish Civil War stuff. The thing that started the process that had eventually ended with the Spanish Civil War was anarchists. As soon as the Republic was declared in, I think, 1931, the left was in charge, and an extreme of the left, the anarchists, started burning convents and churches.
Yeah.
And that got the whole ball rolling that 5 years later ended up in people shooting each other.
I mean, it's not even 100 years ago. If I would have told you 15 years ago, maybe, that this sort of was going down, I think both of us, even though, both of us are pretty red pilled or whatever you want to call it, we're pretty dark about, short-term prospects here. I think I would have been even surprised, of this kind of stuff. Like I would have been really surprised, and it really is. We are at some sort of moment, but the Spanish Civil War thing is, I think, been a long underappreciated pattern for what we've been kind of walking into over the last 15 years.
Kale, I want you to at the show notes put on there a link to something I've talked about a lot on my blog. There's a YouTube, it's available on YouTube. It's a documentary by Granada Television, a British TV.
It's down in the description, people. It's down in the description.
From the 1980s about the Spanish Civil War. And they were able to go back in the 1980s and still interview a lot of people who were still alive from both sides. And it was a pretty balanced take on it. All you have to do is watch the first episode. I think it's like a 6-part series. The first episode is about the prelude to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you watch that as an American in this decade, and it is chilling because it didn't come from nowhere. It started out with people becoming more and more ideologically divided. It began with the radicals on the left burning convents and churches, attacking what's most sacred to people on the right. Yeah. People on the right come back to power and they repaid the favor. And this went back and forth until finally they were at war. And I remember there's a quote in there from a man who was on the far right in Spain back at the time. And he said, by 1935, whenever we saw a socialist or a communist or someone on the left walking down the street, we saw a devil, and they felt the same way about us. Right. So I can remember a few years ago, remember when Pussy Riot, the Russian band, they invaded an Orthodox church and went behind an altar and played an anti-Putin song, and they got arrested for that. I remember criticizing them for that. And so many of my American liberal friends were like, how can you dare defend the government here? I'm like, you don't understand. If they had stayed outside the church, said whatever they want about Putin, I would have defended them. I don't care what they say about Putin. When you go in a church, if you're a religious person, you go behind, in an altar, this is sacrilege and this is something sacred. But American liberals simply cannot bring themselves to enter into the imagination of people who see things as sacred. And I think there are people, liberals or people on the left and other cultures who do have a sense of the sacred, but that's not the case here.
Of course, yeah. So it's interesting to me. You look at the Spanish Civil War situation, and you were talking about basically conservatives and Marxist revolutionaries, and I think we both, in retrospect, are pretty comfortable talking about that as a religious war, right? It's that is a religious right versus a religious left situation. Even though, of course, the communists would not consider themselves religious as such. But I think if you expand out, what actually is a religion, what has historically, at least in the last couple of 100 years, risen up to mediate these opposing religious forces has been liberalism. Right. But it is liberalism that has had a very cozy sort of relationship with its moral infrastructure that it has received by way of Christianity But now, we're in this sort of situation where it is still, and I would contend that it is no surprise to me that the forces that are aghast at the potential overturning of Roe versus Wade, they immediately turn this. Their primary rant is against religion, and it's really explicitly anti-Christian and others, but primarily anti-Christian. Yet they do not understand that their ideology, their standpoint, is also a religion. It also has its dogmas. It also has its presuppositions. And the failure of them either to acknowledge that to others or to themselves is giving it a kind of unconscious energy and power that does give me the willies.
Yeah. I mean, that it is, this is one of the points I make in Live Not by Lies, is that wokeness is a pseudo religion.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, it has dogmas that cannot be rationally examined. And it has that kind of force. The thing about the pro-life cause is you don't have to refer to God to be pro-life. It turns out that most of the pro-life people are motivated by religious concern, as were most of the abolitionists in the 19th century.
Correct.
But the claim that the unborn fetus or embryo, whatever you want to call it, is a human being, is a claim that can be justified by science. But they don't want to deal with that at all. And I mean, and here's another thing too that has just completely escaped the reporting on this. In most of Europe, which is a more godless place than we are, in most countries in Europe, abortion is more restricted than in America.
Amazingly so. And I think this is a fact that a lot of American liberals and progressives haven't really faced up to, that we are told and scolded to look to Europe for X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to this issue, the Europeans are really much more moderate in their position in terms of policy, in terms of actual policy. And I think that basically, look, I'm a pro-lifer through and through. I think abortion is an evil. But if you look at the polling on the issue, the American electorate is far to the right of the Democratic mainstream and a little bit to the left of the Republican mainstream, right? Most people are basically okay with it, even though they're not crazy about it for the first trimester, even though the whole trimester thing is really a fiction unto itself. But early on, there's ambiguity about it. Very few people will say it's an outright good, but they might say it as a kind of a necessary
tolerable evil.
Right. But once you get in midway point and beyond, the American people do not have a stomach for that kind of unfettered access.
And that's what the Europeans are in general.
That's right.
But one thing that worries me about our own side is here in Louisiana. I think there's been a move by some Republican in the state legislature to make people who procure abortions guilty of homicide. And that really bothers me, not because I don't think abortion is in some form homicide, but we're not. That strikes me as incredibly imprudent and likely to be the sort of thing that causes such an electoral backlash that we end up with more abortions. And so this, but this gets to a classic dilemma that we had to face on the pro-life side. Do we want to reduce the number of abortions, or do we want to be ideologically pure?
Pure, right. Well, and maybe this dovetails nicely to what we've been talking about with the general skittishness of people in the normie right, historically in the last 25 years, 30 years or so, to be kind of skittish about the exercise of state power and statecraft, right? And so what statecraft is ultimately a prudential use of power, making compromises and all those sorts of things. Well, it's really easy to be ideologically pure, right? It's really difficult to actually govern and to exercise state power. So maybe this is in similar fashion. Is it better to reduce overall the number of abortions, or do you want to remain pure, as you say? That's a really good point.
This is the thing that I think. Look, I think it doesn't make sense for most Americans to believe that abortion should be permitted in the first trimester, but after that, not. Logically, you can drive a truck through those holes.
Sure,
nevertheless, that's where people are. And if that's where people are, and we can reduce the number of unborn children who are killed in their mother's wombs, then I'm willing to meet people there where they are and try to convince them otherwise. And we have fewer and fewer abortions now than we used to. This is all to the good, but I do not want the purest among us who have maybe the best interest at heart to end up scuttling everything because out of their extremism.
I'm sort of going to change the topic here, but something you said made me chuckle. I saw a couple of tweets in the aftermath, and it was something to the effect, these sort of very aggressively pro-abortion folks, pro-choice folks. and they were saying like, well, this is it. If Roe is going to be overturned, then all you guys looking for casual sex can just go somewhere else because no more sex or something like this. And so that made me chuckle, like, oh no, not that.
I can't sleep with the blue hair, blue hair and green hair people.
Right. But to be respectful of sexuality. Wow, no, perish the thought. And then the other one that was really, really making me chuckle, is this idea is like, well, if this is the case, then we need to put in place some kind of law that's going to make every man who sleeps with any woman who gets pregnant fiscally liable and responsible for this up until the age of 18. And you're like,
they don't get it. Like, we agree.
I think we have something. I think that's called but just totally whip. They've rediscovered, the benefits of the institution.
Imagine
in a roundabout. Imagine that. Right? It's just so
imagine
good.
that. Well, I think something that might have happened since you and I talked last is the death of Edwin Edwards. Have we talked about that?
We have not talked about good old Eddie.
Well, great Louisianian, Governor Edward Washington Edwards.
Hey, Rod, this is a Democratic politician that both you and I have voted for.
This is right. True. I voted for this guy.
We have both voted for the great Edwin Edwards, probably in the pantheon of most corrupt politicians ever.
Oh,
would you say that?
He wasn't David Duke, so we voted for him.
But he wasn't David Duke, so we both vote for the crook. I think the
vote for the crook. It's important.
It's important. Yeah, I love it. That's so great.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah. He passed away in his 90s. I think he was on his third wife, and he had a little baby.
Yeah.
What did he say? That one of the last things he was known for, he said that they take my blood to make Viagra. Come on, you've got to love this guy.
That guy was amazing.
He was, and I actually came to love the old guy. I remember when I was in college at LSU, in the 80s, I hated this guy. He was everything that was wrong with Louisiana. He was corrupt. He didn't care. And this is true. He was corrupt. He didn't care. But fast forward to this past decade, the last time he ran for office, he ran for Congress, and he didn't make it past the Democratic primary. But I listened to him interviewed on the radio, and I'm like, this guy makes more sense than any of the Democrats and any of the Republicans.
Right. Yeah. Sort of this is the throwback to it. It's like a direct connection to the Huey Longs. I mean, he's that kind of guy.
But this is the thing. To go back to Orban for a second, in the context of Edwin Edwards, I had an American friend, a think tank guy, who came and spent about a month in Hungary while I was over there, and he said at the end, he said, basically Hungary is Mayor Daley's Chicago. Yeah, things aren't working strictly according to democratic norms, but things are working, and it's basically okay. But if you have was Mayor Daley Chicago a fascist state? No. Was it pure democratic? Wherever was it Stockholm? No. But it was fine. That's Hungary.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that it's really easy to sort of get to be a purist about these things. I have to think about that. You've given me something to really chew on. Like, what exactly, what does it mean to do the dirty work, right? And I don't mean dirty work as in corruption, but like, what does it mean to really do the work of compromise and to sort of figure out, not letting the best be the enemy of the good, that kind of idea.
And politicians like Edwin, for all their problems, and I think you and I both agree, he was corrupt.
Yeah.
But I think that I have a certain a grudging respect in my old age for what men like that could accomplish, because like him or not, Edwin got stuff done. And I think that I begin to see, the older I get, I begin to see the wisdom of some of these more Latin countries, and that's why they say Louisiana is so corrupt, is because we have the French and the Spanish heritage and a tolerance for corruption. And it's true, the Southern European countries are more corrupt than the Northern European countries. But at the same time, the older I get, the more I realize that there's such a deep appreciation for human nature, and not just political, but just human nature in those countries, and how completely flawed and broken we are as people.
Yeah. No,
Oh my God. I to be in Jerusalem as I was on Holy Week, and to think about all the things that happened there. And, this was a week this year for Orthodox Easter, which is a week after Western Easter.
yeah. Yeah.
It was when Ramadan was coming to an end, Passover was coming to an end, and Orthodox Easter. And so many of the Christians in the Holy Land are Orthodox. Man, everybody, the Jerusalem police were on very high alert. I saw some things there that I did not like, the way they treated Christians. Nevertheless, to be fair to them, there was all that tension there. And even today in the year 2022, you can be there and you can feel how people in a place like that with those kind of tensions could have said, crucify him, crucify him.
Yeah.
It didn't seem so far away at all.
Right.
And I don't even know why I got into this, other than just to say that human nature never freaking changes. And
that's the problem. I think that's the problem with purity, sort of the purity rubric, if you'll allow it. You have to, your system has to be able to account and to afford for mess. It's messy, and
it is messy. And I just wonder now, I hadn't had this thought ever until just now. Thank you, Kale. But I'm wondering how I would feel about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky if I were asked about it today. I mean, I was outraged by it at the time, and I would still be outraged. No president, that's disgraceful what he did. Nevertheless, I think I'd probably think a lot about the prudence of taking a president out over something like that.
Yeah.
And it's not because I feel that it was somehow morally justified, but I don't know, man, the older you get, I'm 55. I'm like, people are messy. Some of the best people I've known, the best people who, in terms of public servants and the good they've done, have been very flawed people. And some of the most morally pure people I have known have been real shits.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I do think, you and I, you were born a couple of years before Roe. I was born a year after Roe.
67, I was born.
Yeah, and I'm born in 73. And, we really have grown up in the wake of that. And I believe I've been really trying to think about what Roe meant and what it created politically and culturally and spiritually. And it was such an unfortunate, independent of what you think of abortion, right, as a right or not. It is undeniable that Roe set the table in an unfortunate way that I think has balkanized the country and set it up for a really, I think the politics that we have lived through, look, Joe Biden. I'm
right next to the refrigerator. I'm able to get more
you do you. But what I mean is that, by the Supreme Court sort of co-opting this issue, it basically stole local politics away from the local. And
Ross Douthat had a column about that.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw that. No, that's a really good insight. No, it's true. And he said that, this was the case where the Supreme Court took this issue, which was being vigorously contested in local legislatures, and they nationalized it. And then they come back in the Casey decision in 92, which reaffirmed Roe and said, we have decided the nation should accept it and move on. And nobody accepted it and moved on. It was crazy. But Ross was pointing out that, by removing this controversial issue from local democratic processes, the court laid the groundwork for what we have today.
Yeah, I mean, and look, in the circus that we see outside of Alito's house right now, and the circus we're seeing outside of the Supreme Court, and the circus we see at every damn confirmation hearing, and it's a direct result of turning this legislative body into a legislative body.
Well, no, you said the legislative body into a legislative. The legal body into a legislative body.
Sorry, yeah. And, it really has done that. And who's been part of this show since the beginning? President Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. He has been.
He has been part of this shit show. Sorry, folks, but he's been part of this starring role from the get-go. And I tell you what, I don't want to talk too much about this because we got to go in here in a minute. But man, you look at video of Joe Biden in the 80s, and you look at him now. It's really frightening. He's sort of turned himself into like good old Uncle Joe now, right? But man, you see those videos of him in the 80s. What a prick.
Right.
And he's just an arrogant prick. He really is a prick. Just so arrogant. Anyway, but you can see how that it creates a kind of, binary, 0 or 1 political reality.
Okay. Well, I got to say this. And this has happened, I think, since you and I have talked. Mm-hmm. I think we did talk from Budapest once about the shocking Russophobia that came out after the war started. I mean, you and I both are against what Russia did, but just the way that we're canceling Dostoevsky, Tchaikovsky, and all that.
Stupid. God, it's so stupid.
So idiotic. All right. But that would have been impossible before the age of woke.
Yeah.
Even during the Cold War, when Russia was ruled by a totalitarian government, nobody thought about, we shouldn't read Dostoevsky, because nobody thought about that. But we are now in a headspace, a cultural headspace where people think about this kind of purity.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
I remember too that, I can remember back in the pre-woke, the proto-woke days, when France would not join our idiotic war in Iraq, pour that French wine down the drain.
Freedom fries.
So our side has part of that too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it's just so freaking stupid. And this is one of the reasons why, for all of its problems, I appreciate Europe, and I appreciate having spent time in Europe, because they got lots of problems over there.
Yeah.
They tend to be more sensible in general about not following these crazy fads that we do. And I'm not quite sure why it is, but they just don't. And
well, you got to figure, living on top of each other for so long with all those different languages and different regions and different tastes and different populations, they had to sort it out. I think that's earned wisdom.
Okay, but look, let me tell you this too. This is something that we need to keep an eye on. Mm-hmm. I had drinks with a foreign journalist, foreign correspondent in Budapest, who said, watch the Balkans, because things are starting to happen in the Balkans again. That where the government of Bosnia, which is a predominantly Muslim country, the Gulf Muslims have been Gulf Muslim regimes have been pouring a lot of money there to try to radicalize the population. I mean, they don't think it's radicalization. I think it's just bringing them towards proper Islam.
Right.
But anyway, that's happening.
Yeah.
And the Serbs are really getting, feeling their muscle again. He said things are going to pop off there. Well, when I was in Jerusalem, I met a Serbian guy. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't live in Serbia. He lives in England. But, just asking him, I'm like, he said, this is what I'm hearing. What do you think? He goes, oh, yeah, it's definitely going to happen. So I'm in, after Easter services, Easter for Orthodox, Easter services start just before midnight. And, there at the Holy Sepulchre, I went to 5 a.m. I stopped at the only falafel shop and only shawarma shop open at that time in the morning in the old city. I go in and I'm having a falafel. And some guys come in behind me and they said, oh, Christos Voskresi, which is, I could tell they were Slavic, and that's Slavic for Christ is risen. Say, well, Istino Voskresi. I said, where are you from? I said, Republika Srpska, which is to say they're Bosnian Serbs. And man, those guys were fierce. I was like, dude, it's happening. It is happening again. And this is something that I'm afraid we're going to see at some point in this decade, because as I was talking to my Serbian friend, who is not belligerent at all, but he was just saying, things are happening on the ground that they're not being reported, and but watch it, because
so what are you saying here? I mean, you're saying that this sort of whatever détente has been in place for the last 25 years is falling apart again?
It's the Dayton Peace Accords. That there's stuff going on. And man, this guy, my Serbian friend, the guy I met, who again, very sophisticated Western expatriate, was showing me pictures of desecrated monasteries by Muslim mobs and stuff. And this stuff is going on and we don't see it. And again, I'm not taking sides there, but I'm just saying that, again, these are things that we don't see. And I can remember talking to a guy, to some people when I was in Brussels, who are involved in work defending the persecuted Christian church. And they were telling me that, geez, we cannot get Western diplomats or media people to care about this. People are being slaughtered, Christians, Black Christians in Nigeria by Muslims, Black Muslims. Right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even register anywhere, because every time, and this is my phrase, not theirs, every time a Western reporter or diplomat or NGO person hears about a Christian dying, they think of it as a little Jerry Falwell.
Yeah, right.
And that's what's going on right now in Kosovo too.
Wow. And
so that's something
that's just kind of dumb. Again, it's just like it's a low res bad take. Well, can I? And I know we're running out of time here. I want to show you one more thing. So you'll remember, Kale. You read my blog that when I was when I went to Jerusalem, I'm working on this book about the re-enchantment of the world, the re-sacralization of the world. And I made a plan to go interview this guy named Wasim Razouk. His family has a tattoo parlor there. They've been tattooing pilgrims to Jerusalem since around the year 1300. They're Copts from Egypt, but they immigrated there. And he's Copts.
Copts, not police officers.
Yes.
They're members of Coptic Christians, among the first Christians. Anyway, he's a 27th generation there, and I wanted to go interview him because
27 generations. That's a lot. 27 generations is a
tattoo
lot.
Artist.
Yeah.
And there's a thing there people have when they go to Jerusalem, this is where it all started. I mean, for the Christians. And a lot of people, including elderly people, want to get tattoos. So I went there to see Wasim and to talk to him about what it meant, why people felt that they wanted to record their pilgrimage on their skin in ink. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to get a tattoo. I hate tattoos. I'm not a tattoo person.
Yeah.
But after the week I had and the fact that being there in Holy Week, I had a tattoo. So I'm going to show you. This is what I have. Can you see it?
I can.
Yeah. It's a Greek. It's a Greek from the medieval era. It means Jesus Christ conquers.
That's
and
great.
I thought, I want to be able to look at my arm from the rest of my life and say, Jesus Christ conquers, because I'm a Christian and he is going to help me through this crisis. And also when they come for me, if they come for me, I'll be like, here I am. Look at my tattoo.
I'm marked. I've always been fascinated by the idea of pilgrimage, and I teach, I have a whole thing I do in my class about this, but there is something very embodied about a pilgrimage. It's a physical journey to a spiritual end, right? It's a you go there, and there's something, to hear you talk about it, there is something truly remarkable to be at these specific and literal spots, right? That there is something amazing, that our faith is not a philosophy. Our faith is not a construct. It's a living, breathing reality. It's an embodied reality. And of course, the scandal that St. Paul talks about, the scandal is that God became man and dwelt among us, and
the flesh,
and right there in the flesh.
Okay, can I?
And that's what I think. And I think that's why I think that there's this desire to market. I mean, there's nothing more real than your body. And so to market that way, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, in Orthodox Christianity, tattoos, you're not supposed to get them. So I'd probably get in trouble for this, but I don't really care. I went to Bethlehem, and when I was in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, I was saying, how do we really know that this is built over the cave where Jesus was? And I was told this by archaeologists, that when St. Helen, the mother of Constantine the emperor, when she went there, she was a Christian before her son was, and she went there to look for it. This had been marked by the Romans, the Roman governors, because Christians were coming to worship there at the spot. And they put a temple of Aphrodite or Pan or some, I don't know, some god or goddess there to mark the spot to send Christians away. This is what they did in Jerusalem too, over where Golgotha is and where the tomb was. And so they marked the spot. I got to go because I had a connection with the Greek Patriarchate. I got to go into the monastery. There was a chapel in the crypt of the Greek monastery in Bethlehem where they had the relics of the Holy Innocents who were all murdered.
Right.
By
Herod.
By Herod, yeah. And I mean, this is recorded in scripture. And like, how do we know this is them? There are baby bones all over under glass. So how do we know this was them? And I was told the story is that Helen was able to bribe a local official to say, yeah, this is where they were buried. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But you understand that this is real. This happened here.
Yeah.
And in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was built by Constantine, again, we know that Golgotha is this hill, the hill where Christ was crucified. It is within the church, as is the tomb. They were very close to each other. I had an archaeologist friend who's also a Protestant pastor, an American pastor. Mm-hmm. He took me into a side room that nobody ever goes into in the church there, the Holy Supper. You can go there, but nobody ever knows to go in there, where you can see first century Jewish tombs. So we know that it was, at one point, this was a cemetery when Jesus was buried. Wow. And I got to tell you, brother, to be there. It's just like, this is where it all happened. This is the center of the world, and it's in Jerusalem. I cannot emphasize strongly enough to our listeners and our viewers, go to Jerusalem if you can. Israel is a great place. Jerusalem it's more than you expect it to be.
Yeah, it's real. And I've been emphasizing this in my own thinking as of late, but this radical confrontation with the real is at the heart of it. It's not just sort of thought experiments. It's not little constructs or little ephemera. Like, there's something real and concrete. It's so important.
It is in our bodies. I mean, I went to the pool of Bethesda, where Christ told the paralytic, get up and walk. You can see the pool. They've excavated it. It is there. You can walk in and look at it.
It's mind-blowing stuff, but it's really to physically be there. It must be it certainly alters your sense of it all.
Yeah, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I cannot wait to take my kids there. That's my second time back there. And this time, I went there the first time, as I mentioned earlier, in 2000 when I covered John Paul being there, and it was mind-blowing. But this time, as a more mature Christian, I saw it and a Christian going through a really significant personal crisis. I saw it with different eyes. And man, I just felt the balm of healing of being there, and you feel the pain of the people there. I mean, I went to the so-called Wailing Wall, the Western Wall of Herod's temple. I prayed for the Jewish people. I prayed for all the people of that place. It's not because I'm some happy clappy coexist ecumenicalist, but you can really, when you meet these people, when you meet Muslims, when you meet Jews, when you meet Christians who are living there and are struggling to live with each other, you realize that most of these people are decent people. They it's just hard, man. Life is hard. And you just want the best for these people. And anyway, please go to Jerusalem. Kale, I hope you get the chance to go. And as somebody, who's a Christian of Jewish heritage, man, this is your place. You got to go.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, man, it is great to be back with you here, Rod.
We're back now.
I missed you. Yeah, it's been tough, but we've got some great things coming up here. We're gonna have we're lining up some guests to come and to gab with us. So I'm really looking forward to that. I just wanted to let everybody know that I did, like apparently every other person who is familiar with a keyboard, I did set up my own Substack, and I'm writing occasionally on it right now. But I hope as soon as my term is up that I've got to really have like a bunch of stuff that I've already started to get out.
Your term is up. What do you mean?
I'm a teacher. I think most people know that. And we end at the end of this month. But I've also, while you were gone, Rod, one of my friends, my colleagues, went on leave. And so I took over his classes. So I've doubled up my teaching load for this month. I'm pretty exhausted. I'm sure, as everyone can probably gather, I like to talk, but it's very strange to think that I have doubled the amount that I talk a week.
Wow.
So
wow.
I'm swimming in it. But the name of my Substack is The Underneath, and I put a couple of pieces up there already. It's a little bit quirky, it's a little bit theology, a little bit literature, a little bit
country, a little bit rock and roll.
Yeah, it's different. It's not polemical. It doesn't tend to be terribly political in terms of topical politics, although I'm sure I'll dabble with a little bit of that. But mostly it's trying to get into the underneath, where to make sense out of things, to find a place to see the marrow of it all. So that's that. I'll put that in the show notes. And I know, Rod, you're still cranking away at your Substack, and additionally, of course, your blog at TAC.
Yeah, so. and I'll be leaving at the end of the month to spend the summer based in Vienna in Austria. I'm researching my next book. Man, I can't tell you how excited I am about this book. It's about the resacralization of the world. I'm meeting amazing people, learning incredible things. And my son Matt's going to be with me there too. And I tell you, it's living with Matt has been it's really interesting. His last roommate, the college roommate, the guy left and moved out on him. And the guy told Matt, Matt was saying, so why the baby oil and the plastic gloves in the trash can? I gotta know, what were you up to? He goes, I was doing Kung Fu prostate massage.
Oh my God.
What the hell? Oh. So ain't no Kung Fu prostate massage going on in this house, brother. We an Orthodox house.
This is good. Yeah, this is an improvement. Poor Matthew. My goodness.
Poor Matthew. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, we're doing fine. And Matt's a DJ, so I'm hearing music that I have never heard before, and it's a sweet time. But no, we're good. So yeah, we'll be coming to you from Vienna this week. We're probably maybe we can go do a live broadcast from the grave of Falco, the Der Kommissar. Yeah, dude.
That would be quite something, Mr. Dreer. That would be amazing. All right, man. Why don't you send us out?
All right, don't get nothing on you.